we've gone back here. I finished this book. It was heartbreaking. There's no other way to talk about it. It was heartbreaking. But I'm gonna go over some of my favorite passages with you and maybe get you to buy and read this book because everyone should. Yeah, it's a book about the Israeli occupation of Palestine and about all of the, as they call them, Nakbas that have happened since 1948, and particularly about the figure that is his grandma, which my ignorance is showing, but I didn't know she was such an important figure in Palestine and in Gaza since before reading this book. But apparently I've researched it a little bit. Mohammed Al-Kurd's grandma was an important figure, well, still is an important figure of resistance against the Israeli occupation. She became an important figure, and apparently, from what I read in this book, there were people, like tourists, going to that place being like, oh my god, you're so brave, I can't believe you're doing this, and whatever. And that she would be faced with US tourists like in her backyard telling her all this stuff and being inspired by her story, all the while being from a country that is funding her like massacre, like the massacre of our people, and she would just turn them away and be like, no. But yeah, that's at the end. Let's go back to the beginning. This poet, the person who wrote this book, who is the grandson of this very important lady, was born in the 50th anniversary of the Nakba. He was born in 1998. And like from the very beginning of the book, you see, I mean, it must be hellish to be from Palestine, to be a Palestinian refugee living in the US, knowing that the US are the country funding the massacre against your people. Like he says in the very beginning, certain verses where he's referring the stones that kids throw at tanks with US flags, you know? And like, tear gas being cured with yogurt and onions, like the way of resist, like it's this idea that you don't have any option but resist, you don't have any option but keep going. So to use like the most banal, basic like things to fight, like they're using yogurt and onions to fight people with tear gas and drones and tanks. You know, like, do you see the ridiculousness of all of this? It's, I'm gonna be stuttering and like being a mess during this whole video because I don't even know how to structure, like, I don't know how to even talk about this. And we have like, from the very beginning of the book, this feeling, this emotion of complete frustration because they aren't allowed to show any revolt because throwing a stone at a tank might get you killed. And he says here, so we dance because screaming is not free. Because if you revolt, if you show any kind of resistance, they might attack you and take your life. And it's what he says at the back of the book as well. Like, why is it being angry such a luxury? You know, it's like at the end of the book, he talked about the fact that his mother was a poet and she wrote articles for this newspaper. What was it? Al-Kurd, something like that. Yeah, Al-Kurd. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but yeah, his mother used to write stuff for Al-Kurd, and everything that she wrote was passed by censors, like people who would read this stuff and make sure if it can be published or not. And I mean, can you imagine in any country with freedom of expression, if you want to criticize the government and you can't, like in the US, you can go on Twitter and say Trump is shit. Trump. You can't say that. You can't say that there. Like, any symbol, any little thing of resistance against Israel is censored in their publications. How insane is that? Like, we had that in Portugal. During the dictatorship, there was censorship to every publication. There was censorship to theater plays from university students. We had that during a dictatorship. And do you know what happened to the dictatorship? The military took over and it ended. By force. Do you see what I'm saying? And there's this general idea throughout the book about his grandmother being older than Israel because she was already born. I think she was a baby in 1948. And he talks here about a soldier as old as a leaf born yesterday pulling the trigger against a woman older than his inheritance, because it's probably from the IDF and his inheritance is a land that didn't exist before her. And then he says each step is a tomb, like it's a grave. And this is the way I'm seeing, like, each step forward that they try to reclaim what was theirs, to reclaim their freedom, just each step forward that they take is a grave to everyone else. And I mean, we saw that, and we keep seeing it because it's still happening. And then he says something else here. They tell us to make fun of the tanks with CVs, not stones. And this person, Mohammed, my God, I forget his name every time. Mohammed Al-Kurd, went to the US to study for his education. And I guess this is the sentiment that he's trying to evoke here. Like, try to fight the sword with the pen. And it's a beautiful sentiment, but it won't work. And then again, this idea, because this is what I've been saying for always, and this is the thing that leaves me completely, is that even if Israel stopped the attack tomorrow, even if they agreed to give back their land and to live in peace side by side with all Palestinians, even if tomorrow they agreed no more war, no more land takeover, we're going to share, we're going to live together, and it's going to be fine. Even if that happened tomorrow, the amount of trauma, of emotional and physical abuse these people have gone through, it's going to take not years, it's going to take generations to heal the amount of trauma they have suffered. And this is the thing that I don't think many people understand, because they think about this conflict as if once it's over, it's peace, it's done. And it's like, no, the consequences, the emotional and psychological consequence, and physical as well, of this are going to ripple throughout generations of these people. And he writes 2 verses here that made me think of that. He writes, because the screams leave me nostalgic, I'm almost not afraid of the sirens. Like, can you imagine the amount of children and young people that will have a big portion of their childhood be constant bombing, constant death? Can you imagine the psychological and emotional toll it has on a person? It's not just you being abused in your family. It's not just you going through conflict once. It's their entire lives. It's always happening. There's always, like, right now it's a big one, but it's always been happening because there's censorship and there's lack of freedom. And I mean, they don't have the same rights as everyone else in the world, or at least as the Israelis have. They don't. And this is the thing, like, how are these kids, how are these people supposed to even know what normalcy is? How are they supposed to go on and live their lives afterwards? After having gone through all of this, after having become accustomed to hearing the strikes every night, you know? And there is another sentiment in this book. I'm never going to shut up about this book. Honestly, maybe I'll put it in the background of all of my videos because this is just insanely good. And he says, an empire, anticipado. Like the preview of an empire on top of the ruins of another. Like, they're literally, to this day, they are already like bulldozing the ruins of where Palestinians used to live in the Gaza Strip to make place for Israeli homes. Literally building an empire on top of a fallen one. How does this not get to you? Like, how does this not bother you? I don't understand how we stopped talking about this, like how the media in general moved on from this, which is still happening. There are still children dying there every freaking day. Every day. Anyway, this is going to be a very bitter vlog. Oh my god, and this one. This is my favorite line of the whole book, and he says it twice. As if God was a real estate agent. Because this is what they tell their people. Like in Israel, this is what they tell their people. It's the promised land. Promised by who? By our God. It's like, who? Your inexistent God? And it's ridiculous to the point where I remember all the way back, like in 2023 when this was happening, and there were a lot of people online having conversations with people from Israel, and there was this one kid, he couldn't have been older than 17, 18 years old, who was having this conversation with someone online, and he was saying, yeah, it's our promised land, but I'm an atheist. And then the guy on the other side was like, then who promised you that land? And then he said, God, it's the promised land by God. And I was like, but you are an atheist. Which God? And then the kid just stopped, like that. And he probably realized, like, the fallacy in the argument. But I love this sentence, because it really does feel like that, like using religion and using something that is supposed to be so pure for people, like faith, at its core level, is just a decent set of moral guides. It's just something to comfort people who are afraid of death. But so many people around the world use religion as an excuse to do anything. Like, the freaking Catholic Church used to burn people on a stake. And this is a perfect line. As if God was a real estate agent. If you don't understand, like, how ridiculous the situation is when this sentence makes sense. And then he says, the 21st century did not stop Nakba from continuing, which just evokes the ridiculousness of the fact that a Holocaust-like event is happening today. It's happening today. I mean, you can't deny it. To the point where I was reading a piece of news the other day where there are going to be celebrations about the end of the Second World War, I think in Poland. And I don't know if this was in Poland or in Germany. It was somewhere there where, I think it was in Germany. I think they wouldn't have done that in Poland, where there are going to be celebrations, and they excluded the group of Jewish people that stand with Palestine. They excluded them from the celebrations because they don't stand with Israel. Like, as if their ancestors didn't go through the same thing. How is this right? How can people even justify this anymore? It's completely ridiculous. And this one, oh my god, like, this broke my heart to a point I can't even explain to you. What do you do when your destiny is already predestined? Like, what do you do when your fate is already written? And this reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine from Brussels. He was from Syria, and he had gone through a lot of conflict and a lot of loss in his life. And we once had a conversation, and he said to me, my destiny is to suffer. And we were back and forth for a while, with me telling him, like, no one's destiny is to suffer. Like, that's completely not true. And he was saying, like, no, you're not getting my point. My destiny is to suffer because of where I was born, because of how I look, because of how the world is built. It's not that he thought that his destiny as a person was to suffer. is that he thought that his destiny as a member of today's society was to suffer. And I mean, it shows my ignorance as well, because I was trying to be like the nice white person, like, no one's destiny is to suffer, you should be happy. And it's like, of course he thinks that way. Of course. He's been, like his home, his people have been destroyed. Like he used to say about Syria that it is kaput, which is kind of like a French way of saying that it's gone. And I mean, of course he thinks that way. Of course he lives in around the people that basically are allied with the people that were responsible for destroying his home. How could he not think that way? And this is the thing I think we who come from privileged countries and privileged places don't really understand, is that because we don't have those experiences, because we never had to fight that hard for our lives, we can't even comprehend what it is like to have that kind of mindset. We can't even comprehend what that amount of trauma does to a person's state of mind and to a person's view of the world. And I think we often, and me included, have this very white savior perspective of everything will be okay. And it's like, yeah, if you're privileged, sure, you'll be fine. But it's not like that for like a big portion of the world. And that sentiment is perfectly encapsulated in this sentence when he says, what can I do, or what is there to do when your fate is predetermined? It's the truth. We are blind to a lot of what's going on. Like, I don't think any person born in any of these privileged countries, and I mean, Portugal is a rather poor country in Europe, but it's literally one of the top 10 safest countries in the world. I think you always think you're in a worse position than you should be, and then you remember, oh no, I'm fine, you know? And yeah, I don't think we will ever be able to understand what it is like to be in their position. And when they take the time, when people who are in a worse position than we are, regardless of how privileged you are or how not privileged you are, when someone who is in a worse position than you are, or who has been in a worse position than you are, tells you that you are not understanding what they're telling you, tells you that you don't know what it is like, that you don't know what it is like, that you're not listening, that we have to believe them, that what we are doing is not enough. And what we're doing in a lot of places in the world is not enough. I'm sorry that I'm not being very structured and I'm not giving like decent opinions and I'm not being able to like find the best words to express what I'm feeling. But yeah, reading this book just makes me feel so angry. And then I feel just so fucking ridiculous, because what do you mean I have the privilege to be angry about some atrocity that is happening in another country, while I live in a country that is supporting the people who are committing those atrocities, and still feel completely powerless to do anything because I vote and the people I vote for are not elected, because I talk to my friends who have different opinions and they still stick to their horrible, misogynistic, racist opinions, because, and I mean, what else? I shouldn't be complaining. Okay, let's continue with the book. Another one. Oh my god, this book is perfection. Like, we as the world should thank this person for having taken the time, which surely was horrible, to write all of this. But he says, 18-year-old soldiers, with shotguns bigger than their torsos, shooting to kill. And it's like, wasn't this a big issue as well with Russia and Ukraine? That Russia was sending like kids to the war, and I think there was a kid that like texted his mom being like, I don't want to be here. And I mean, the amount of, because this happens in every country, right? We are taught history from the perspective of our country. Like the way that we were taught about the Portuguese colonialist past was that it was a time of discoveries, that we discovered places of the world and we created like merchant routes, and like the Portuguese were heavily involved in a transatlantic slave trade, heavily involved in massacring places, in forcing people into taking Portuguese names and converting to Catholicism. Like, to this day, there are so many missionaries, Portuguese missionaries around the world. And the way that we are taught is that it was a time of glory for the country. And this happens in every single country. Like, the Israeli soldiers think that there is their right to do what they're doing. The Russian soldiers think they are protecting the motherland. Like, everyone thinks they're doing what is right. And this is the point of learning history, is learning how these countries, how every country almost manages to indoctrinate their people to such an extent that they believe they are doing what is right by their people. Everyone is our people. Like, the entire freaking species. Oh, another one. Beautiful. That is kind of about the little acts of rebellion that come from kids, where it says, violence is not children facing dragons. Because there's this whole debate from the Israel side that, like, if there's a kid or a teen or someone throwing a rock or a stick at a drone or at a tank, is considered like an extreme act of violence. Some people are taken prisoners or even shot for this. And it's like, yeah, like, imagine a child comes to you in the street and throws a rock in your face. Are you really going to murder that child? No, you're going to be like, kid, where's your mom? Stop throwing rocks at people, you know? And it's just the amount of oppression that such a innocent act from a child, like, is considered violent enough to take them to prison, or violent enough to off them. The amount of oppression to consider a child a danger to your country, filled with tanks and drones and one of the most advanced militaries in the world. The amount of oppression you have to put a people through to consider their kids a threat. My channel is never gonna grow after this video. I'm being too much of a woke, leftist, feminist bitch. Another one. Here we know two suns, the friend of the earth and the white phosphorus. You can't read this stuff and remain, like, indifferent. And they say reading isn't political. And part 2 of this, and they say reading isn't political, there's this beautiful sentence. If Shakespeare was from here, he wouldn't have wrote. Because you would be dead. Or censored. This one is just completely horrible and it broke my heart beyond belief. But he wrote, I'm sorry that my translation is so shit. I'm pretty sure the book is written in English, so just buy it in English. He wrote, a boy was empty this morning. His mother put him in the slot of a vending machine. I don't know how to translate this, but sticky man, I guess, put dollar bills in his mouth. And then there's another reference to this passage in page 95. Yeah, in a poem he called Martyr. And he's just, like ridiculing what you call a martyr, where it's just a person who was trying to live their lives and they are forced into being a message for everyone to understand how ridiculous this is because they just die with a stick in their hand or something like that. And he writes, martyr didn't take part in combat. Martyr who was sweeping away airplanes from their verandas. Martyr, he was in love, crawling under the bus. And there's a lot more. And then he says, martyr coin for the vending machine. And then there's another jab at God where it says, God sits up from his high bench to take care of devout drunks. And then again, there's this great sentiment. I don't even know how to describe the way he writes. It's just true and completely heartbreaking from its truthfulness. And he writes, there's no poetry in this. There's no poetry in suicide. There's no poetry in cigars or cigarettes. And then at the very end of the poem, he writes, there's no beauty in this. And I think this reminded me of that very famous quote where someone says, like, the blood was never beautiful, it was just red. This idea that events that happen in real life are never poetry, are never beauty. It's just the way that we tell them that it turns them into a beautiful story. And him saying this is just spot on, because it's like, this isn't a story. This isn't a beautiful poem. This is happening to people now. The blood is red and it's coming off of a kid. Another one that's just, the innocuous journal titles, the psychological effects of the occupation. And then he says, I never felt free anywhere, not with the Jordanian passport. And then he says, not in Santa Monica, the American Tel Aviv, not in New York, the American Tel Aviv, not in Tel Aviv, the American Tel Aviv. Like, the idea that Israel is owned by the US, that without the US they couldn't do any of this. And yet he lives in the US. He's probably a refugee there. Well, I don't think he would be considered a refugee. He went there for his education. But this is what I was talking about in my previous video, when I pulled out this book. And I pulled out this book that talks about this idea of a country being gone, and then the people who were originally from that country are basically just perpetually homeless because their homeland doesn't exist anymore. And this idea that he doesn't feel safe anywhere because everywhere is controlled by the same people. And he still doesn't have a choice, because what else is he going to do? Go back to ruins? And then there's this poem that is titled, Why Are You Talking About Nakba at the Party? I'm assuming it's some party attended in the US, or the idea of it at least. And then he says, why are you explaining the morning to a cock? Like a rooster. They wouldn't recognize the truth, even if it was right, like in their sight, like in front of their eyes. And this is what I've been saying as well. Like, everything that is happening, all these people that are making decisions that affect other people, the rise of the right-wing parties in Europe, what's happening in the US, in South America, all this stuff, like, these people that go against abortion rights, that go against, like, reproductive rights, they go against women's rights, they go against immigrants' rights, they know it's wrong. They know it's okay for women to have an abortion. They know it's okay for immigrants to work in the country because they're contributing to social security and to the development of it. They know it's okay. They just need a point of division. Like, all these people that you think that have the same values as you, if you are a Christian, Catholic, I don't know, if you are native from your country, they don't care about any of it. They know the truth. They know that it's wrong, but they need a point of division in the country, because the only way they can plant themselves in the country and stay planted there is if they can create division between the people and then just come in as the saviors of it all. And this is it. They wouldn't recognize the truth even if it was right in front of their eyes. Because they can't. Because if they admit the truth, if they admit what they know, if they admit that what they're doing is wrong, then what platform do they have? They lose all their power, because their power was built on creating division, on creating, on going against all these things. Like, if Israel tomorrow admits that it is wrong, that what they're doing is wrong, and they stop everything that they're doing, what the hell happens to the military? To the military? To the IDF? They won't freaking need it. I mean, of course they will, but, I mean, what are they using it on? They're using it on the surrounding countries, because they want more land. If tomorrow they decide that it's okay to stay where they are and just defend where they are and live peacefully with everyone else, what is the IDF for? This is what all the girlies on TikTok have been saying. Oh, you don't want men to defend you. Who is going to go to war? And we're all out there saying, no, let's not have wars anymore. Let's stop funding the military and let's just create peaceful countries with healthcare and education, free for everyone. The way that so many people ridicule us for not wanting to go to war, for wanting to live peacefully with anyone, because it's unrealistic. Like, where is it unrealistic? This one, still in the party poem, he says, they talk about me and they say those people. The way that it was translated in Portuguese is really great, because they use a word that can be used to kind of be like, those people. But yeah. And then there's this one. Washington spat on Mandela how many times before he kissed him? A lot of people say that's what's happening, it's an apartheid, what Israel are doing with the Palestinians. I think people look at those times in history thinking, oh, it was so long ago, we would never do something like this. And I think it's harder to admit that we are doing something like this because we're living it in the present. And we never want to think that we're living through a horrid time in history, but we are. Like, history books in the future are going to look at this period of time as a stain in human history. Like, it's a complete stain. What's happening, not just in Palestine, not just in the Gaza Strip, what's happening in a lot of places is going to be seen as an absolute stain in our history as human beings. And the ridiculous thing is that when it's all over, regardless of how it ends, regardless of whether the Palestinian people find peace, or they are exterminated from existence, the only thing that is going to happen is that in 50 years, in 100 years, someone will issue an apology and admit it was wrong. Like, for US reference, all the way when the Vietnam War started, how many protests were made against it? Like, how many people were against that? And then now we know that it was stupid. The fact that people can't look at history and see similarities with the present and realize that we are living another insane period of time is ridiculous to me. How can you look at what's happening and just go on by and just assume it's normal, that it's a natural state of human beings to be at war? Like, that is insane. Completely insane. And here it is, like what I've been saying about the way that living in such circumstances changes the way a person looks at themselves and looks at the world. The psychological consequences of this are absolutely insane. And he wrote a couple verses that says, "What will my children learn from a world that ignores them?" How many videos of Palestinians have you seen on social media being like, please don't scroll, please don't ignore us, please don't forget us? Can you imagine, like, being a kid and having to stand in front of a camera pleading for help, knowing that most people will ignore you? Another passage that I just beautiful, because I don't know if you remember this, but a while back, the people in the Gaza Strip were starving to death, and the US had a freaking audacity to send them planes with food. And there's this, by the way, this was written in 2021. So like this has been happening, like these tactics have been happening for a long time, but the West sent them like planes with food, all the while like approving billions and billions and billions of dollars in war support to Israel in like weapons and stuff. And then sending the planes with food to the Palestinians, like, I'll feed you to keep you alive so you can be bombed tomorrow. And he wrote this in the book. Millionaires distributing charity. And I'm supposed to be thankful that they recognize our blood in their hands. And yeah, that's where I'm gonna end it. I hope you watch the whole video. I hope you will buy this book and read it and then give it to your friends and force them to read it. And I hope that never again and I hope that anytime you hear anyone saying that reading isn't political, you throw a chair in their face to maybe wake them up to real life and realize that they probably don't have this book in Palestine. There's no way this would pass any censorship. You have the right to read about their suffering, and they don't have the right to resist their suffering. Since my last update, I also started reading volume 10 of Spy Family, which is just adorable. We're reading about the main blonde dude's midnight childhood and how he became an agent. And I also read a bit more on Near the Wild Heart. And this book, first of all, is amazing. Second of all, is leaving me with so many questions and making me think so much about what's being written, because her prose style is out of this world, actually. It's like it's made for you to drown in it and then have to swim all the way to the end of the book to be able to come up to the surface. That's how it feels like to read this book. Yeah, I'll keep updating you on it. As for the writing, well, since the last time I updated you, I found a couple more journals, and yesterday I submitted my short story. It's about 5,000 words long. I submitted it to a journal in Brussels and to a couple of journals in the US. No, one in the US and one in the UK. I have absolutely no hopes of the story ever being accepted in any of those journals, but if it is, I will post it somewhere. I need to find a way to either create a website or something like that to link it to this page and to have all my writing and reading journey on it, where I can post stuff like that, like the poems that I've already managed to publish I want to post in a page, a short story that I published in a journal in the UK last year I want to post in that page. So yeah, maybe in the future I'll have some updates on that. But that's my reading and writing for this past week and a half, kind of. I will be working on my draft, because I mentioned in my last video that I was just finishing a draft it's for a book. It's for a strange book, but I'm very near to the end of the first draft and I already have a clue of what I'm gonna do for the second draft, because the first draft for this specific project is really very loose. It's a very loose idea of this one character in this one format and with a couple of plot lines, but I need to put some meat on the bones. I need to rearrange the bones into a skeleton, because that's the thing. This first draft is not even a skeleton. It's like the loose bones that I need to rearrange into a full-blown skeleton. But yeah, apart from that one, I will probably be working on another short story that I started a while ago. That is going to be so much fun. I already have a couple of drafts. I think I'm working on my third draft at the moment for that story. So yeah, I will update you when I have news, and maybe I need to think about this, because I would love to have writing updates, but on written posts. So maybe I'll use the community tab, or I have to build a website for myself. That's the thing. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you paid attention to the passages that are ready from RIFQA, and I hope you will buy that book. Please buy that book. First of all, you'll be supporting a Palestinian author. Second of all, you need to read it. I mean, you need it. It's one of the best ways to be, like, not educated, but confronted with reality is to read books. Like, just do it. Just buy it for yourself, buy it for your family, give it to your friends, just pass it around. And if you have other media about, well, not just Palestine and what's happening in Gaza, anything that is happening around the world that is absolutely freaking ridiculous that humans are doing to each other, please send it my way. I will read all of it. I will put all of it in videos. I will do my best to make sure that everyone gets it. And yeah, see you eventually with something else. Bye bye.